I walked into my daughter's backyard and heard the words that shattered me to my core. Why is he even still alive? He's just a burden now. Those weren't the whispers of strangers. They came from my own flesh and blood. My daughter. About me. I didn't leave. I didn't cry. I didn't even confront her. I went somewhere darker. I began to plan. Don't forget to subscribe and comment where you are watching from. For most of my life, I believed betrayal came from enemies, strangers, competitors, people who stood across from you face to face. But betrayal, the real kind, does not come from the outside. It comes from the people you sit across the table from, the ones you raise, the ones you would give your last breath for. They smile at you, they hug you on holidays, but inside, they carry the knife they plan to stab into your back. I thought I had already survived the worst pain life could hand me. I buried my wife after cancer slowly took her away from me. I held her hand when she took her last breath. I thought nothing could cut deeper than that. But those words, from my daughter, carved wounds that even death had not left behind. For decades, I worked myself raw to give her the life she lived. I built her childhood with my own 2 hands, working overtime shifts, pulling 18-hour days, missing birthdays and anniversaries, all so she never had to know hunger, cold, or struggle. I sent her to the best schools, bought her first car, walked her down the aisle when she married. Every dollar I earned, every ounce of sweat, every ache in my bones was for her. And now, in her eyes, I was nothing more than a burden. I walked away from that backyard that day, but I did not walk away broken. I walked away planning. They wanted me gone. They wanted to erase me from their lives as if I were just dead weight. But I had something they did not expect: time, patience, and 45 years of wisdom. And so, I did not leave. I went somewhere darker. I designed a plan, a slow, methodical revenge that would dismantle their perfect little world piece by piece until they realized what it meant to call me useless. This is not just a story of betrayal. It is the story of what happens when the man you cast aside decides to fight back with silence, with calculation, and with nothing left to lose. Let me paint you a picture of the man I used to be before I learned that love can be the most dangerous weapon you can give someone to use against you. For 45 years, I got up every morning at 5 a.m. to work as a mechanic at Peterson's auto shop downtown. But that wasn't enough to give my family the life I wanted them to have. So 3 nights a week, I'd clean offices until midnight, coming home with aching bones and grease under my fingernails that never quite came clean. My wife Margaret would have hot coffee waiting for me, and we'd sit at that old kitchen table planning Sarah's future like she was some kind of princess who deserved everything the world had to offer. When Sarah got accepted to State University, I remember the day that acceptance letter came in the mail. Margaret cried tears of joy, and I felt prouder than I had ever felt in my entire life. My little girl was going to be the first person in our family to graduate from college. So what did I do? I marched down to the bank and withdrew every penny from my retirement account. $78,000 that I had saved working double shifts for 20 years, gone in one afternoon to pay for her education. Did I regret it? Not for a second, because I believed I was investing in her future, in her happiness, in a better life than the one I had been able to give her growing up. When she graduated magna cum laude 4 years later, I thought it was the proudest moment of my life. She hugged me so tight at that graduation ceremony and whispered, "Thank you, Daddy," in my ear, and I would have given her every penny all over again just to hear those words. But the expenses didn't stop there, oh no. When she started dating Mark in her senior year, I welcomed that boy into our family like he was my own son. When they decided to get married, Sarah came to me with tears in her eyes, saying she wanted the perfect wedding, but they couldn't afford it on their entry-level salaries. What was I supposed to do? Let my baby girl settle for some courthouse ceremony when she deserved to feel like a queen on her wedding day? So I took out a second mortgage on the house that Margaret and I had spent 30 years paying off. $35,000 for one day, for flowers and a dress and a reception that would make her feel special. I worked nights at Murphy's Diner for 2 additional years after that, serving coffee to drunks and cleaning up messes just to pay off that loan. My back was screaming by the time I turned 65, but seeing Sarah dance at her wedding made every aching hour worth the sacrifice. Then came the house. Oh, that beautiful house they wanted in the suburbs with the white picket fence and the 2-car garage. They had good jobs by then, but their credit wasn't quite good enough for the mortgage they needed, so once again, dear old Dad came to the rescue with a $60,000 gift for the down payment. I cleaned out my savings account again, but I told myself this was different. This was an investment in their future, in my future grandchildren, in the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Standing there, frozen in that backyard, every word coming through that kitchen window felt like a physical blow to my chest, but I forced myself to keep listening because I needed to know exactly how deep this betrayal ran. Mark's voice carried that casual cruelty that only comes from someone who thinks they're completely safe from consequences. Look, I've been running the numbers, and the old man has got to be worth at least $1 million between everything. That house of his is sitting on prime real estate, probably worth $800,000 in today's market. Plus, I know Sarah's been handling his banking, so we know exactly how much he's got stashed away. My daughter, my precious little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she had nightmares, responded with the cold efficiency of an accountant discussing a business transaction. Dad's got $412,000 in his savings and checking accounts combined. I've been monitoring his statements every month since he gave me power of attorney. Then there's that Union life insurance policy he's had for 30 years, worth exactly $200,000. We're looking at almost $1.5 million total. The way she rattled off those numbers, like she had memorized every penny of my life's work, made my blood run cold. This wasn't some spontaneous conversation. They had been planning this, calculating my worth, preparing for my death like vultures, circling a dying animal. Jake's voice joined the chorus of greed with an enthusiasm that made me want to vomit right there in their flower bed. Holy crap, seriously? We're talking about enough money to change all our lives completely. I could pay off those student loans that are killing me, maybe buy that sports car I've been dreaming about, hell, maybe even quit that dead-end job at the warehouse. Mark laughed. And I swear that sound will haunt me until the day I actually do die. Slow down there, buddy. First, we need to figure out the most cost-effective way to handle the old man's care. I've been researching nursing homes, and there are some real bargain basement places across town where we could warehouse him for practically nothing. Once we show that he's spending down his assets on his own care, the state will pick up most of the tab. The casual way he used the word warehouse to describe my future living situation told me everything I needed to know about how they viewed me. Not as a human being, not as the man who had sacrificed everything for their comfort and happiness, but as an inconvenient obstacle standing between them and my money. Sarah's next words hit me like a sledgehammer to the soul. I've actually already started looking at facilities. There's this place called Sunset Manor that's basically a holding cell for old people waiting to die. $300 a month if you can prove financial hardship, and they don't ask too many questions about the quality of care. We could have him declared incompetent, move him in there, and nobody would be the wiser. They were discussing my future imprisonment with the same enthusiasm most people reserve for planning vacations. Every detail had been thought out, every angle calculated, every aspect of my dignity and autonomy prepared for sacrifice on the altar of their greed. What happened next in that conversation shattered whatever remaining pieces of my heart were still intact, because they started talking about timelines and logistics like they were planning a corporate merger instead of discussing their father's death. Sarah's voice took on this business-like tone that I had never heard from her before, cold and efficient in a way that made me realize I had never really known my own daughter at all. The thing is, we can't look too eager, you know? We need to make sure everything appears natural and above board. I think our best strategy is to gradually convince him that he's sicker than he actually is. Maybe get him to agree to more intensive care arrangements voluntarily. Mark jumped on that idea with disgusting enthusiasm. Oh, that's brilliant. We could start talking about how worried we are about his health. Maybe suggest he needs more supervision, more help with daily activities. Make him think it's all his idea to move into assisted living. Jake, my own son, who I had taught to throw a baseball and change a tire, added his own twisted contribution to their scheme. And once he's tucked away somewhere, we can start handling all his financial affairs completely. Sell that house fast before the market changes, liquidate those accounts, make sure everything gets transferred properly. The beauty of it is, he'll probably be so drugged up in whatever facility we choose that he won't even realize what's happening. The calculating nature of their discussion made me realize this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment conversation born out of frustration or stress. This was a carefully considered plan that they had obviously discussed multiple times before. They had been studying me, analyzing my weaknesses, looking for opportunities to exploit my trust and love for them. Sarah continued outlining their strategy with the precision of a military operation. I think we should start this week. Dad's been mentioning those dizzy spells he's been having. Nothing serious, according to his doctor, but we can use that. We'll start expressing more concern, maybe suggest he shouldn't be living alone anymore. If we play it right, we can have him convinced that moving to a care facility is the responsible thing to do within a month or two. The most devastating part was hearing how well they knew me, how they understood exactly which buttons to push to manipulate my emotions and decisions. They knew I would prioritize their peace of mind over my own comfort. They knew I would sacrifice my independence if I believed it would make their lives easier. They had studied my character like scientists examining a specimen, identifying every weakness they could exploit. Mark's voice carried this satisfied tone as he laid out the final phase of their plan. Once we get control of his assets, we need to move fast. Real estate markets can be unpredictable, and we don't want to get stuck holding a property that might lose value. I'm thinking we list his house immediately, price it to sell quickly, and split the proceeds 3 ways. Same with the investment accounts and the life insurance when the time comes. They were dividing up my life's work before I was even dead, parceling out decades of sacrifice and hard work like they were splitting up pizza slices. Every dream I had about leaving them something meaningful, every hope I had about being remembered as a loving father and provider, was being reduced to dollar signs and percentage calculations. Let me tell you something about being an old man that most young people don't understand. When you've lived through wars, recessions, the death of loved ones, and countless disappointments, you develop a kind of emotional armor that serves you well in moments of crisis. Standing there listening to my family plan my demise, I felt that armor sliding into place like it hadn't done since I was a young soldier in Vietnam. The initial shock and heartbreak transformed into something much more dangerous and focused: cold, calculating rage. I realized that charging into that kitchen, screaming and confronting them, would accomplish nothing except giving them the opportunity to lie, manipulate, and gaslight me into believing I had misunderstood their conversation. They were skilled manipulators. I could see that now. And they would find a way to turn my righteous anger against me, probably claiming I was having some kind of mental breakdown brought on by old age and grief. So instead, I did what any good strategist would do. I retreated to plan my counterattack. I carefully backed away from that kitchen window, picked up my bag of groceries from where it had fallen, and walked quietly back to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition, but I managed to start the engine and drive away without anyone in that house knowing I had ever been there. The drive home felt like it took hours, even though it was only 15 minutes. Every traffic light, every turn, every familiar landmark seemed foreign and strange, like I was seeing the world through different eyes. The eyes of a man who had just discovered that everything he believed about his life and his family was a carefully constructed lie. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, I sat in that car for probably 20 minutes just staring at my house, my sanctuary, the place they were already planning to sell before my body was even cold. I thought about Margaret and how heartbroken she would be if she knew what our children had become. She had always seen the best in everyone, always believed that love and kindness would be returned in kind. She would have been devastated to learn that the children we had raised together, the babies we had nursed through sickness and celebrated through every milestone, had grown into these calculating, greedy strangers. But Margaret wasn't here anymore, and it was up to me to protect what we had built together from the vultures who happened to share my DNA. I finally went inside and walked straight to my workshop in the basement, the one place in the house that was completely mine. Surrounded by tools I had collected over decades, projects I had been working on, pieces of furniture I had been building for my grandchildren, I sat down in my old leather chair and tried to process what I had learned. These weren't impulsive words spoken in a moment of frustration. This was a calculated plan developed over months, maybe even years, designed to separate me from my independence, my dignity, and ultimately my life as quickly and efficiently as possible. They had been studying me like a problem to be solved, and they thought they had found the perfect solution. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. If my family wanted to play games with my money and my life, then it was time for this old man to show them what 4 decades of hard work and careful planning could accomplish when properly motivated. I started with my financial records, spreading every bank statement, investment summary, and insurance policy across my kitchen table like a general planning a military campaign. What I discovered in those first few hours of investigation made my blood boil and confirmed my worst suspicions about how long this betrayal had been going on. There were unauthorized withdrawals from my checking account, small amounts at first, probably tests to see if I was paying attention. $50 here, $100 there. Charges that could easily be explained away as mistakes or legitimate expenses if I ever questioned them. But over the past 6 months, these mysterious withdrawals had grown bolder and more frequent. $200 for groceries that I had never received, $300 for household repairs that had never been done, $400 for medical supplies that had never been delivered. In total, they had stolen over $3,000 from me using the power of attorney I had so trustingly given them. But the unauthorized withdrawals were just the beginning of what I found. My credit cards, which I had given them access to for emergencies, had been used to finance their lifestyle in ways that made me sick to my stomach. Mark had charged $800 at an upscale steakhouse for what the receipt described as a business dinner, except I knew he worked in middle management at an insurance company that certainly didn't authorize $800 meals. Sarah had used my card to buy $1,500 worth of designer clothes from department stores I had never even heard of. Purchases made while I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner to stretch my grocery budget. Jake had charged over $2,000 at an electronics store, buying a new laptop, tablet, and smartphone that he certainly hadn't purchased for his dear old dad. The most infuriating discovery was a charge for over $4,000 at a luxury resort in Florida, a weekend getaway that Sarah and Mark had taken last month while I was home nursing. What they told me was just a minor cold. They had literally used my money to pay for a vacation while I was sick and alone, and they probably laughed about it the entire time they were sipping cocktails by the pool. Every receipt, every statement, every unauthorized charge told the story of a family that had been systematically robbing me while pretending to care about my well-being. They had turned my love and trust into their personal ATM, funding their comfortable lifestyle with money I had earned through decades of back-breaking labor. But here's what they didn't know about their old man. I hadn't survived 68 years on this earth by being careless with money or naive about human nature. Every financial transaction in my life was documented, every receipt saved, every investment carefully tracked. If they wanted to play financial games with me, they were about to discover they had picked a fight with someone who understood money management better than they ever would. 3 days after my devastating discovery, I made an appointment with Patricia Wells, the best estate attorney in our city, and someone I had been considering consulting about updating my will anyway. What I didn't expect was how quickly she would identify the scope of my family's deception, and how expertly she would guide me toward protecting myself from further exploitation. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 50s, who had built her reputation handling complex estate cases, and within the first 10 minutes of our meeting, she had identified several red flags in my current legal situation that sent chills down my spine. "Robert," she said, reviewing the power of attorney documents I had brought, "these papers give your daughter frighteningly broad authority over your finances and medical decisions. She could theoretically have you declared incompetent, move you into a care facility against your will, and liquidate all your assets without requiring your consent or even your knowledge." The casual way she described my vulnerability made me realize how close I had come to walking into a trap that would have destroyed my independence permanently. I showed her the evidence of unauthorized charges and withdrawals I had discovered, and her expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed each fraudulent transaction. "This is elder financial abuse, plain and simple," she said. "What your family has done constitutes several criminal offenses, including theft, fraud, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The fact that you granted them power of attorney doesn't give them the right to steal from you or use your resources for their personal benefit." She explained that the legal system takes elder abuse very seriously, and that the evidence I had collected would be more than sufficient to pursue both criminal charges and civil remedies against my family. But then she asked me a question that cut straight to the heart of what I really wanted. The question is, Robert, what outcome are you looking for here? Do you want them punished by the legal system, or do you want something more personal and comprehensive? I thought about that question for several long minutes, weighing my options and considering what would truly satisfy the burning need for justice that had been consuming me since I overheard their conversation. Criminal charges would certainly hurt them, but they would also cast me in the role of victim, a helpless old man who had been taken advantage of by his own family. That wasn't the story I wanted to tell. I want them to understand exactly what they've lost. I told her. I want them to face the consequences of their choices in a way that makes them realize they destroyed their own future through greed and callousness. Patricia smiled, and I could see she understood exactly what kind of justice I was seeking. In that case, we need to be much more strategic. We need to protect your assets completely, document their continued deception thoroughly, and position you to reveal their true nature in a way that destroys not just their financial expectations, but their social standing and self-respect as well. Over the next 2 hours, she outlined a comprehensive plan that would safeguard my resources while giving my family enough rope to hang themselves with their own greed and manipulation. Patricia recommended a private investigator named Marcus Thompson, a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes and family fraud cases. When I met Marcus at his office the following week, I quickly realized that hiring him was one of the smartest decisions I had ever made. This man had a talent for uncovering secrets that would have remained hidden forever without his expertise and resources. "Mr. Robert," Marcus said after reviewing the evidence I had collected, "your family has been running a very sophisticated con game on you, and I suspect what you've discovered so far is just the tip of the iceberg. Give me 2 weeks, and I'll show you exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes." What Marcus uncovered over those 2 weeks painted a picture of deception and financial desperation that was far worse than I had imagined. My son-in-law, Mark, the man I had welcomed into my family and trusted with my daughter's happiness, had a gambling addiction that had spiraled completely out of control. He owed over $40,000 to various casinos and online betting sites, debts that were growing every month despite the money he was stealing from me. His salary from the insurance company wasn't nearly enough to cover his losses, and he had been using my credit cards to make minimum payments on his gambling debts, while accruing more debt every week. Sarah, my precious daughter who I had sacrificed everything for, had developed a shopping addiction that would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. She had opened credit cards in her name that were maxed out with over $60,000 in debt, mostly from luxury purchases she couldn't afford and didn't need. Designer handbags, expensive jewelry, high-end electronics, and clothes that cost more than I used to make in a month. She had been using my money to maintain a lifestyle that was completely unsustainable, living like she was wealthy while building a mountain of debt that would eventually bury her. Jake, my son who I had taught the value of hard work and honest living, had been lying to everyone about his employment situation for over 6 months. He had been fired from his warehouse job for repeatedly showing up late and calling in sick, but instead of telling the family or looking for new work, he had been pretending to go to work every day while actually spending his time playing video games and smoking marijuana in his apartment. The money he had been stealing from me was literally his only source of income, and he was using it to pay rent and buy drugs while lying to everyone about his circumstances. But perhaps the most devastating discovery was that all 3 of them had been meeting regularly without me, planning and coordinating their deception like a criminal enterprise. Marcus had photographed them at restaurants and coffee shops, heads bent together over documents and notebooks, plotting their strategy for separating me from my money and independence. They had created a detailed timeline for my decline and death, complete with contingency plans for different scenarios and backup strategies if I became suspicious of their motives. These weren't desperate people making impulsive decisions out of financial pressure. These were calculating predators who had targeted me specifically because they knew I loved them and would be reluctant to defend myself against their attacks. Armed with complete knowledge of their deception and a carefully crafted plan for justice, I decided it was time to give them exactly what they wanted. If they were so eager to see me decline and become dependent on their care, then I would become the helpless, declining old man of their dreams. But every moment of my performance would be calculated to give them more rope to hang themselves with. I started small, mentioning during our weekly phone calls that I had been feeling more tired than usual, that climbing the stairs to my bedroom was becoming more difficult, that I sometimes felt confused about things that used to be simple. Sarah's response to my manufactured decline was disgustingly predictable. Instead of expressing genuine concern or offering emotional support, she immediately started pushing for more control over my daily life. "Dad, I'm really worried about you living alone in that big house, and," she said during one conversation, her voice dripping with fake concern, "maybe we should look into getting you some help or finding a place where there are people around to make sure you're okay." I played my part perfectly, expressing reluctance and fear about losing my independence while gradually allowing them to convince me that their suggestions were reasonable and necessary. "I don't know, Sarah," I would say. "This house has so many memories of your mother. I'm not sure I'm ready to think about leaving it." "I understand, Dad, but we just want what's best for you. Maybe we could start by looking at some nice assisted living communities just to see what options are available. You don't have to make any decisions right away." Mark joined these conversations with enthusiasm that made me want to laugh at how transparent he was. "Robert, there are some really nice facilities these days. Nothing like the old stereotypes about nursing homes, places with activities and social opportunities, medical staff on site, really comfortable accommodations." The way he described these facilities, you would think he was recommending luxury resorts instead of the bargain basement warehouses he had been researching to dump me in. Jake's contribution to my managed decline was even more pathetic. He started showing up at my house unannounced, claiming he was checking on me but actually casing the place for valuable items he wanted to claim before I died. He would walk through my rooms with barely concealed excitement, commenting on pieces of furniture or collectibles that held special memories for him, already dividing up my possessions in his mind. "Dad, you've got so much stuff in this house," he would say. "It might be good to start thinking about what's really important to keep and what could be simplified." The beautiful part of my performance was watching how eagerly they embraced my supposed decline. Every sign of weakness I displayed was met with increased attention and concern, not because they cared about my well-being, but because it signaled that their payday was approaching. They started visiting more frequently, calling more often, and taking a more active interest in my daily activities, all while I secretly documented every conversation and recorded their true motivations. The next phase of my plan required me to dangle irresistible bait in front of their greedy faces, something so tempting that they would abandon any pretense of caution or genuine concern for my welfare. I decided to create a fictional investment opportunity that would reveal just how eager they were to see me spend my money recklessly in the hope that I would die sooner rather than later. During one of our family dinners, I casually mentioned that I had been talking to an old friend from work who had told me about an incredible investment opportunity. You know Tommy Richardson, the guy I used to work with at Peterson's auto shop? I said, watching their faces carefully. Well, he called me last week about this real estate development project down in Florida. Some kind of luxury retirement community that's looking for private investors. Sarah's eyes lit up with interest that had nothing to do with my financial well-being. Really? What kind of investment are we talking about, Dad? Well, Tommy says they're looking for $500,000 minimum investments, but the projected returns are incredible. 25% annually for the first 3 years, then 15% ongoing after that. It's some kind of limited partnership deal where you get ownership stakes in multiple properties. I could practically see the dollar signs dancing in their eyes as they processed this information. Mark leaned forward with poorly concealed excitement. Robert, that sounds like an amazing opportunity. I mean, with interest rates being so low right now, finding returns like that is almost impossible through traditional investments. Jake jumped into the conversation with enthusiasm that confirmed everything I suspected about his financial desperation. Dad, you should totally do this. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? You've got plenty of money sitting around not doing anything productive. The beautiful irony was that they were encouraging me to make what they believed was a risky investment that could potentially lose hundreds of pies, thousands of dollars, not because they thought it would benefit me, but because they hoped it would reduce the size of my estate and speed up my decline. They wanted me to gamble away my life savings because they figured they would inherit whatever was left anyway, and a smaller inheritance was better than a longer wait. Over the following weeks, they became increasingly insistent that I pursue this fictional investment opportunity. Sarah volunteered to help me research the company, Mark offered to review the legal documents, and Jake suggested I should invest even more than the minimum amount to maximize my returns. They were practically pushing me toward financial ruin because they thought my potential losses would become their certain gains. What they didn't know was that I was using their enthusiasm for my fictional investment to set up real financial protections that would ensure they never saw a penny of my actual money. While they were encouraging me to throw away $500,000 on a non-existent real estate deal, I was working with Patricia to establish trusts and legal structures that would permanently remove my assets from their reach. 3 months into my carefully orchestrated performance, I decided it was time to escalate the psychological warfare by giving them a taste of what they thought they were waiting for. I called Sarah and asked her to organize a family meeting where we could discuss updating my will and making sure all my legal affairs were in order. I've been thinking a lot about mortality lately, I told her over the phone, putting a slight tremor in my voice that suggested fear and confusion. All this talk about investments and assisted living has made me realize I need to get my affairs in order while I'm still thinking clearly. Sarah's response was immediate and enthusiastic. Oh, Dad, that's such a responsible thing to do. I'm so proud of you for thinking ahead like this. When would you like to have this meeting? How about this Sunday afternoon? Maybe you could invite Mark and Jake, and we could all sit down together and talk through everything. I want to make sure I understand all my options and that everyone knows what my wishes are. What they didn't know was that I had already met with Patricia multiple times to create a completely new will and trust structure. that would leave them with nothing but disappointment and regret. The will I was planning to show them was a decoy, designed to make them believe their manipulation was working while I gathered even more evidence of their true motives. Sunday afternoon arrived, and I set the stage perfectly for their performance. I had spread out fake legal documents across my dining room table, made myself appear slightly more frail and confused than usual, and prepared to give them the show they were expecting. When they arrived, their barely concealed excitement was palpable. They were practically vibrating with anticipation as they saw the papers scattered across the table, probably calculating their individual shares in their heads before they even sat down. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice weaker than usual. "I know this isn't the most pleasant topic, but I need to make sure everything is handled properly. I don't want there to be any confusion or fighting after I'm gone." Sarah immediately jumped into her concerned daughter act. "Dad, we're here to help you with whatever you need. This is important stuff, and we want to make sure you feel comfortable with all your decisions." I began reading from the fake will, describing how I planned to leave the house to Sarah, the investment accounts to Mark, and my life insurance to Jake. As I outlined their respective inheritances, I could see them trying to hide their satisfaction and excitement behind masks of appropriate solemnity. They were so focused on the dollar amounts that they barely listened to the legal language or asked any meaningful questions about my actual wishes or concerns. Mark's contribution to the meeting was particularly disgusting. "Robert, this all sounds very fair and well thought out. I think you're making really smart decisions about how to distribute everything." Jake nodded eagerly. "Yeah, Dad, this is great. I mean, it's sad to think about, but it's good to know that everything will be handled smoothly when the time comes." They spent the next hour helping me organize papers, asking detailed questions about account numbers and asset values, and making suggestions about how to streamline the probate process. Their focus was entirely on logistics and efficiency, never once on my emotional state or my concerns about mortality. While my family was busy planning my demise and calculating their inheritances, I was building an ironclad case against them that would destroy any sympathy they might expect when their true nature was finally revealed. With Marcus's help, I had installed discreet recording equipment throughout my house and car, ensuring that every conversation with my family was captured in crystal clear audio that could never be disputed or explained away. The recordings I collected over the following weeks were more damning than anything I could have imagined. They spoke about me with casual cruelty when they thought I was out of earshot, discussing my health, my finances, and my future with the same emotional detachment they might use to talk about a stock portfolio or a piece of real estate. During one particularly revealing conversation that took place in my kitchen while I was supposedly napping upstairs, Sarah and Mark discussed the timeline for my expected decline with chilling precision. "I think we should start pushing harder for the assisted living thing," Sarah said. "Dad seems more confused lately, and I think we could probably convince him that he needs more supervision." Mark agreed enthusiastically. "The sooner we get him moved out of this house, the sooner we can get it listed and sold. I've been watching the real estate market in this neighborhood, and prices are still climbing. Every month we wait is money out of our pockets." But the most damaging recording came when Jake visited one afternoon and thought I had gone to the grocery store. He called his friends and actually bragged about the money he was going to inherit, describing my expected death like it was some kind of lottery ticket he was waiting to cash in. "Yeah, man, the old man is finally starting to lose it," he said into his phone. My sister thinks we can probably get him into a home within the next few months, and once that happens, it's just a waiting game. I'm looking at close to $500,000 when all is said and done. I'm thinking about buying a house, maybe a nice car, definitely taking a long vacation somewhere tropical. The casual way he discussed my death like it was an inconvenience that was taking too long to happen showed me exactly what kind of person I had raised. This wasn't a young man who was struggling with the natural sadness of losing a parent. This was a predator who was frustrated that his victim was taking too long to die. I also recorded their conversations about the fake investment opportunity I had dangled in front of them, and their responses revealed the depth of their callousness in ways that still shock me. Instead of expressing concern about my financial security or trying to talk me out of what appeared to be a risky investment, they actively encouraged me to pursue it with enthusiasm that bordered on the manic. "Dad should totally do that Florida deal," Mark said during one recorded conversation. "Even if he loses some money, it's not like he's going to live long enough to worry about it. And if it pays off, great, more for us." Their willingness to encourage what they believed was a potentially disastrous financial decision revealed everything I needed to know about their priorities. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively hoping I would make choices that would hasten my decline and reduce my ability to support myself independently. Every recorded conversation provided more evidence that they viewed me not as a beloved family member deserving protection and care, but as an obstacle standing between them and financial security they felt entitled to receive. The final test of their character came when I decided to stage a medical crisis that would reveal once and for all whether they possessed any genuine concern for my well-being or if their caring behavior was purely performative. I scheduled an appointment with my doctor and asked him to participate in a small deception that would help me understand my family's true motivations. Dr. Martinez had been my physician for over 15 years, and when I explained what I had discovered about my family's behavior, he was both shocked and willing to help me gather the evidence I needed. "Robert, what you're describing is elder abuse," he said. "If your family is manipulating your health concerns for financial gain, that's not just morally reprehensible, it's potentially criminal." We arranged for me to call my family in a panic, claiming that Dr. Martinez had found something concerning during my routine checkup and wanted me to come in immediately for additional tests. I made that call on a Tuesday morning, putting genuine fear and confusion in my voice as I told Sarah that the doctor was worried about some test results and wanted to see me right away. "Sarah, I'm scared," I said, letting my voice shake with what sounded like genuine terror. "Dr. Martinez called this morning and said he needs to see me immediately. He wouldn't tell me what it was about over the phone, but he sounded very serious." Sarah's response was everything I had expected and nothing I had hoped for. Instead of offering comfort or emotional support, her first concern was logistics and timing. "Okay, Dad, don't panic. Which hospital are you supposed to go to? Do you need someone to drive you, or can you get there yourself?" There was no warmth in her voice, no attempt to reassure me or help me manage my fear. She sounded like a secretary scheduling an appointment rather than a daughter comforting her frightened father. Mark and Jake's reactions were even more telling. When Sarah called to inform them of my supposed medical emergency, they both responded with barely concealed excitement rather than concern. Marcus had positioned himself in the hospital parking lot with a long-range camera, and he captured their arrival in perfect detail. They didn't walk into that hospital like people worried about a loved one's health. They strutted in like people expecting to receive good news. The expression on their faces as they approached the information desk wasn't anxiety or fear, it was anticipation. Dr. Martinez played his role perfectly, calling them into a private consultation room where he delivered the news they weren't expecting to hear. "I'm happy to report that your father's test results came back completely normal," he said, watching their faces carefully. "His blood work is excellent for a man his age, his heart function is strong, and there are no signs of any serious health issues. He should expect to live many more healthy, active years." The disappointment on their faces was so obvious that Dr. Martinez later told me he had never seen anything quite like it in 30 years of practicing medicine. Sarah actually looked angry, as if my good health was somehow a personal affront to her plans and expectations. While my family was busy making plans for my money, I was working with Patricia to ensure they would never see a penny of what I had spent 45 years accumulating through honest work and careful saving. The legal structures we created were designed not just to protect my assets, but to make sure my wealth would go to causes and organizations that would honor the values Margaret and I had shared throughout our marriage. We established the Margaret Robertson Memorial Trust, a charitable organization that would provide scholarships for deserving students whose families couldn't afford college expenses. Every penny of my life insurance policy, every dollar from the eventual sale of my house, every cent in my investment accounts would go toward helping young people achieve their educational dreams without the crushing debt that had become so common in modern America. The beauty of the trust structure was that it was completely irrevocable and beyond my family's reach, even if they managed to have me declared incompetent or gained complete control over my affairs. Patricia had crafted the legal documents with surgical precision, ensuring that no court order or family challenge could redirect those funds back to my ungrateful children. We also created a new will that left each of my family members exactly $1, along with a detailed explanation of why they were receiving such a small inheritance. The language Patricia used was legally bulletproof but emotionally devastating, making it clear that their disinheritance was not an oversight or mistake, but a deliberate consequence of their choices and behavior. "To my daughter Sarah," the will read, "who taught me that love can be counterfeited and trust can be weaponized, I leave the sum of $1 and the knowledge that greed has cost her everything she might have inherited through genuine affection and care." The sections addressing Mark and Jake were equally pointed, acknowledging their specific betrayals and making it clear that their financial desperation and moral bankruptcy had earned them exactly what they deserved: nothing. But the most important element of our asset protection strategy was the comprehensive documentation we had assembled, proving their theft, fraud, and manipulation. Every unauthorized charge, every forged signature, every instance of financial abuse was meticulously cataloged and supported by bank records, credit card statements, and recorded conversations. Patricia explained that this evidence would not only protect my estate from their inevitable legal challenges, but could also serve as the foundation for criminal charges if I decided to pursue that option. "Robert," she said during one of our meetings, "what your family has done to you constitutes multiple felonies. Elder financial abuse, theft by deception, fraud, and conspiracy are all serious crimes that carry significant prison sentences. The evidence you've collected would make prosecution relatively straightforward if you choose to go that route." I thought long and hard about whether I wanted to see my own children and son-in-law behind bars, and ultimately decided that public humiliation and financial ruin would be more satisfying than criminal prosecution. Prison would make them victims in the eyes of some people, but social disgrace and bankruptcy would make them examples of what happens when greed destroys family bonds. After 6 months of careful planning and evidence collection, it was time to bring my carefully orchestrated campaign to its devastating conclusion. I decided to host what I told my family would be a celebration of life gathering, an opportunity for me to share memories and express gratitude while I was still healthy enough to enjoy everyone's company. The invitation I extended was irresistible to their greedy hearts. A large family party where I would publicly acknowledge their love and support while discussing my legacy and the impact I hope to have on future generations. I want to bring everyone together, I told Sarah when I called to propose the gathering. All the cousins, the neighbors, some old friends from work, everyone who has been important in my life. I've been thinking about mortality a lot lately, and I realized I want to celebrate the relationships that have mattered most to me while I'm still able to enjoy them. Sarah's enthusiasm for this party was immediate and intense. "Dad, that sounds wonderful. What a beautiful idea. When were you thinking of having it? How about 3 weeks from Saturday? That should give everyone time to clear their schedules. I was thinking we could have it right here in the backyard, maybe rent some tables and chairs, get some catering. I want it to be really special, a gathering that people will remember." The beauty of this setup was that it gave me 3 weeks to invite everyone whose opinion mattered to my family's social standing and professional lives. I called Sarah's co-workers, Mark's business associates, Jake's friends, our extended family members, neighbors who had known us for years, and old friends who remembered Margaret and respected the life we had built together. I presented the invitation as a celebration of family love and legacy, an opportunity to honor the bonds that had sustained us through difficult times and to look forward to a future built on mutual support and genuine affection. What they didn't know was that I had also invited Marcus, the private investigator, Dr. Martinez, Patricia, my attorney, and several other professionals who had witnessed their deception firsthand. I had arranged for professional recording equipment to capture every moment of what was about to unfold, ensuring that their public humiliation would be preserved for posterity. The RSVPs came pouring in as people responded to what they believed would be a heartwarming celebration of family unity and an aging patriarch's gratitude for a life well lived. Sarah threw herself into party planning with an enthusiasm that would have been touching if I hadn't known her true motivations. She was probably imagining this as a preview of my funeral, an opportunity to practice receiving condolences and being viewed as the devoted daughter who had cared for her father in his final years. Mark volunteered to handle the catering, Jake offered to set up tables and chairs, and they coordinated their efforts like they were planning the social event of the season. What they were actually doing was preparing the stage for their own public destruction, arranging the very gathering where their true character would be revealed to everyone who mattered in their personal and professional lives. The day of the gathering arrived with perfect weather, sunny skies, and comfortable temperatures that brought out the best in my backyard garden that Margaret had planted years earlier. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, over 50 people had gathered in my yard, creating exactly the kind of warm, festive atmosphere that would make the coming revelation even more shocking and memorable. I had prepared my presentation with the same attention to detail that had served me well during 45 years of mechanical work, ensuring that every piece of evidence was organized logically and every recording was queued up for maximum impact. The party began exactly as my family expected, with food, drinks, conversation, and the kind of social interaction they had been looking forward to as an opportunity to play their roles as devoted family members in front of an appreciative audience. I gave them almost an hour to enjoy themselves, to accept compliments on their dedication to their aging father, to bask in the admiration of people who believed they were witnessing genuine family love and support. Sarah worked the crowd like a politician, accepting praise for her attention to my needs and her concern for my welfare. Mark told stories about our fishing trips and family vacations, painting himself as the loving son-in-law who had embraced me as a father figure. Jake charmed people with anecdotes about lessons I had taught him and wisdom I had shared, presenting himself as a grateful son who valued family above everything else in life. Then, at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon, I called for everyone's attention and began the presentation that would destroy their carefully constructed images forever. "Friends and family," I said, my voice strong and clear, "I asked you all here today because I wanted to share something important with the people who matter most in my life. Over the past several months, I've learned some things about human nature that have been both heartbreaking and educational, and I believe it's important to share those lessons with all of you." I started with the recordings from that first day in Sarah's backyard, playing their cruel conversation about my burden on their lives and their eagerness for my death through speakers that ensured everyone in the yard could hear every devastating word. The reaction from the crowd was immediate and visceral. Gasps of shock, expressions of horror, and looks of disgust spread through the gathering like wildfire, as people heard my own children discussing my death with the casual indifference they might use to talk about disposing of unwanted furniture. Sarah's face went white as her own voice filled the backyard, describing me as a burden and expressing frustration that I was still alive. Mark looked like he was going to be physically sick as his laughter at my expense echoed through the speakers, his cruel amusement at my supposed decline now heard by everyone who had ever respected him as a family man. Jake tried to leave, actually started walking toward the gate, but I had positioned Marcus and several other allies strategically around the yard to ensure that none of them could escape before facing the complete consequences of their choices. What followed was the most satisfying moment of my entire 68 years on this earth. As the recordings continued to play, revealing month after month of calculated deception and financial theft, my family's carefully constructed facade crumbled in real time in front of everyone who mattered in their personal and professional lives. Sarah tried to interrupt, to explain or contextualize what everyone was hearing, but I had prepared for her attempts at damage control. "Please, let me finish," I said firmly, my voice carrying the authority of a man who had finally taken control of his own narrative. "I think everyone deserves to hear the complete story before we discuss what it all means." The next recording I played captured their conversation about my assets, their detailed knowledge of my financial situation, and their excitement about inheriting money they believed I was too naive to protect. The crowd heard them calculating my worth down to the penny, discussing the most efficient ways to warehouse me in a cheap facility, and planning to sell my house before my body was even cold. Mark tried to claim that the recordings were taken out of context, that they had been discussing hypothetical situations or expressing frustrations in a moment of stress. But the evidence I presented next destroyed any possibility of explaining away their behavior as anything other than calculated elder abuse. I showed bank statements highlighting their unauthorized withdrawals, credit card bills documenting their theft of my money for luxury purchases, and documented evidence of their lies about employment, gambling addiction, and shopping compulsion. Every person in that backyard could see the pattern of deception and exploitation that had been carefully planned and systematically executed over months of manipulation. Jake finally found his voice and tried to turn the situation around by claiming that I was having some kind of mental breakdown, that my accusations were the product of paranoia and confusion brought on by aging and grief. It was exactly the response I had expected from him, and I had prepared the perfect counter to his desperate deflection. "That's interesting, Jake," I said, pulling out my phone and dialing Dr. Martinez's number on speaker so everyone could hear our conversation. "Doctor, I have you on speakerphone with my family and friends here. Could you please share with everyone the results of my recent comprehensive medical and psychological evaluation?" Dr. Martinez's voice came through clearly as he confirmed that I was in excellent physical and mental health for a man of my age, with no signs of cognitive decline, dementia, or any condition that would impair my judgment or memory. "Robert is one of the sharpest patients I have," he said. "His mental acuity is excellent. His memory is clear and accurate, and there are no medical reasons to question his assessment of his situation or his decision-making capacity." The crowd turned back to my family with expressions that had moved far beyond shock into territory that resembled genuine disgust and contempt. These weren't just disappointed relatives learning about family dysfunction. These were members of their community realizing they had been completely deceived about the character of people they had trusted and respected. With their denials and deflections thoroughly demolished, it was time to reveal the full scope of the consequences they would face for their betrayal and theft. I introduced Patricia to the gathering and invited her to explain the legal implications of what everyone had just learned about my family's behavior toward me. Patricia stepped forward with the professional confidence of someone who had handled these situations many times before, and her explanation of elder financial abuse laws and penalties sent visible shockwaves through my family's faces. "What you've heard today constitutes multiple criminal offenses," she said clearly. "Elder financial abuse, theft by deception, fraud, and conspiracy are all felony charges in this state. The evidence Mr. Robert has collected, including recorded admissions of guilt, documented financial transactions, and witness testimony, would make prosecution relatively straightforward for any district attorney's office." Sarah finally found her voice, but instead of accepting responsibility or expressing remorse for her actions, she tried to claim that everything they had done was legal because I had given them power of attorney. Patricia's response destroyed that defense completely. Power of attorney gives you the legal authority to make decisions on someone's behalf, but it absolutely does not give you the right to steal their money, use their credit cards for personal purchases, or exploit their trust for your own financial benefit. Every unauthorized transaction represents a separate criminal offense, regardless of your legal relationship to the victim. Mark's contribution to their defense was even more pathetic. He claimed that any money they had taken was compensation for the time and effort they had spent caring for me, a kind of informal payment for services rendered. The crowd's reaction to this explanation was audibly disgusted, especially when I revealed the contrast between their supposed caregiving and their actual behavior. "In 6 months of supposed caregiving," I said, "they visited me exactly 12 times, spent a total of perhaps 20 hours in my company, and provided zero actual assistance with daily living, medical care, or household maintenance. Meanwhile, they stole over $8,000 and charged more than $15,000 in unauthorized purchases to my credit cards. Jake's defense was perhaps the most telling of all. Instead of showing remorse or accepting responsibility, he became angry and defensive, claiming that I owed them money anyway because of everything I had put them through over the years. "You act like we're criminals, but you've been a burden on our lives for months," he said, his voice rising with indignation. "Maybe we took some money, but you owe us for all the stress and worry you've caused us." The shocked silence that followed his outburst was broken by nervous laughter from some people in the crowd who couldn't believe they were witnessing such a complete lack of self-awareness and basic human decency. Jake had essentially admitted to theft while simultaneously claiming he was the victim in the situation, confirming everything negative that everyone had just learned about his character. The last phase of my public revelation involved showing everyone exactly what my family's greed and betrayal had cost them in concrete, measurable terms that would make the consequences of their choices impossible to ignore or minimize. I had Patricia distribute copies of my new will to everyone at the gathering, ensuring that my family's disinheritance would become public knowledge and that their financial desperation would be understood by everyone in their social and professional circles. "This is my new last will and testament," I announced, holding up the legal document that represented the final severing of our family bonds. "It reflects the lessons I've learned about character, loyalty, and the true meaning of family love over the past several months." The will's language was devastating in its precision, leaving no doubt about why my family was receiving nothing but contempt and disappointment from the man they had tried to exploit and manipulate. Each section addressing their specific betrayals was read aloud, ensuring that everyone present understood exactly what they had done and what it had cost them. To my daughter Sarah, who taught me that the love of money can corrupt even the most sacred relationships, I leave $1 and the knowledge that her greed has cost her an inheritance that would have provided security for generations. To my son-in-law Mark, who welcomed me into his family while secretly planning to warehouse me in the cheapest facility he could find, I leave $1 and the hope that he will someday understand what genuine family loyalty actually means. To my son Jake, who celebrated my expected decline while stealing money to fund his irresponsible lifestyle, I leave $1 and the recommendation that he learn the value of honest work and personal responsibility. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. I explained to the gathering that my entire estate, worth over $1.5 million, would be donated to the Margaret Robertson Memorial Trust, a scholarship fund that would help deserving students attend college without crushing their families financially. Everything I worked for, everything I saved, everything I planned to leave to my family will now go toward helping young people who understand the value of education and appreciate the sacrifices others make for their benefit, I said, watching the full impact of their loss register on their faces. The scholarships would be awarded annually to students who demonstrated both academic merit and genuine gratitude for the opportunities they received, ensuring that my life's work would continue to have positive impact long after I was gone. The crowd's reaction to this announcement was spontaneous applause, recognition that justice had been served and that something beautiful had emerged from something cruel and ugly. My family, meanwhile, stood in stunned silence as they realized that their months of manipulation and theft had gained them nothing but public humiliation and permanent estrangement from the man who had loved them unconditionally for decades. The social consequences began immediately as people started approaching Sarah, Mark, and Jake to express their disgust and disappointment. Neighbors who had respected them as devoted family members now looked at them with contempt and suspicion. Co-workers who had admired their apparent dedication to caring for an aging parent now questioned everything they thought they knew about their character and integrity. 6 months after that devastating afternoon in my backyard, I'm sitting in the sunroom of my new home in a lovely retirement community 2 states away, surrounded by people who appreciate friendship, honesty, and genuine human connection. The move was my choice, motivated not by declining health or inability to care for myself, but by a desire to start fresh in a place where people know me for who I am rather than for the drama of my family's public destruction. The retirement community I chose is nothing like the cheap warehouse facilities my family had researched for me. This is a place where residents are treated with dignity and respect, where activities and social opportunities are designed to enrich rather than just occupy our remaining years, and where the staff understands that growing older doesn't mean becoming invisible or irrelevant. I have new friends here who share my interests in woodworking, fishing, and reading, people who appreciate conversation and company without any hidden agendas or ulterior motives. The Margaret Robertson Memorial Trust has already awarded its first scholarships to 12 deserving students, young people who wrote heartfelt essays about their educational goals and their gratitude for the opportunity to pursue their dreams without financial burden. Reading their letters and meeting them at the scholarship ceremony was more rewarding than anything I could have experienced if I had left my money to family members who would have spent it on luxury cars, gambling debts, and designer handbags. These students understand the value of sacrifice and hard work in ways my own children never learned despite my best efforts to teach them those lessons. The trust is administered by a board of educators and community leaders who share Margaret's and my commitment to supporting young people who might otherwise be unable to afford higher education. Every semester, I receive updates on the scholarship recipients' progress, their achievements, and their gratitude for the opportunities they've received. Their success stories have become the greatest source of joy in my life, confirmation that my decision to redirect my legacy away from my biological family toward deserving strangers was absolutely the right choice. As for Sarah, Mark, and Jake, their lives have become cautionary tales that illustrate the consequences of greed, deception, and betrayal. Sarah lost her job at the marketing firm where she had worked for 8 years when her employer learned about her theft and manipulation of her father's finances. Mark's insurance company conducted an internal investigation after learning about his gambling addiction and financial desperation, ultimately terminating his employment for what they determined were conflicts of interest that compromised his professional judgment. Jake's unemployed status became public knowledge, ending his ability to maintain the pretense of stability and success he had been presenting to friends and potential romantic partners. More devastating than their professional consequences, however, has been their complete social isolation within our community. The story of their betrayal spread quickly through networks of mutual friends, neighbors, and extended family members who had witnessed their public humiliation firsthand. People who had once respected them as devoted family members now view them as manipulative predators who exploited a vulnerable elderly relative for financial gain. Their reputations are permanently destroyed, Their credibility is non-existent, and their prospects for rebuilding trust or respect in our hometown are essentially impossible. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.